In the stillness of the night at a deserted construction site, two workers out for a walk stumbled upon a suspicious-looking suitcase. Curious, they cautiously unzipped it, only to recoil in horror as a human head rolled out, partially wrapped in a red blanket. But the chilling question remains: who would leave behind something so gruesome, so deliberately placed? Let's rewind to the night of March 21st, 2013, in Chengdu, Sichuan Province, China. The construction site had just shut down for the day. Lights off. Last shift finished. Two workers, exhausted and hungry after a long day, headed out to grab dinner. After their meal, they decided to walk off the food by strolling around the site. As they circled back behind the warehouse area, something unusual caught their eyes: a suitcase lying next to a folded blanket in the corner of the lot. They exchanged puzzled looks. Just before dinner, there had been nothing there. Perhaps, they thought, someone had dumped trash while no one was watching. At first, they assumed it was discarded junk, but curiosity got the better of them. As they got closer, they noticed the suitcase was oddly intact. No scratches, no dents. The blanket, however, was stained with a thick, dark red liquid. Alarmed, but still unsure, they cautiously unzipped the suitcase. What happened next would haunt them forever. A severed human head tumbled out. Shocked and terrified, the two men screamed and ran to alert the site manager. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene. Upon opening the suitcase further, investigators discovered 9 dismembered body parts, all belonging to a middle-aged woman, including the head. Fingerprint analysis quickly revealed the victim's identity, one of 2 women who had been reported missing a few days earlier. According to police records, the missing persons report had been filed by the woman's son on March 20th. But before diving deeper into the case, it's important to understand the family's background. The mother, Huaqing Li, had been diagnosed with late-stage breast cancer several months prior and was undergoing treatment at a major hospital in Chengdu. Because her son had to continue working, caretaking duties fell to her oldest daughter, Xiaomin Luo, a 26-year-old who temporarily relocated with her mother to a small rented room at a guest house near the hospital. During this time, the son, Xiaolong Luo, kept in touch regularly, calling to check in and offering support from afar. But beginning March 19th, all contact was lost. Despite calling dozens of times and sending countless messages, both phones remained powered off. Worried sick, Xiaolong rushed to both the guest house and the hospital. He asked around at both locations. No one had seen either woman. What alarmed him more was that Huaqing Li had missed her final scheduled radiation treatment on the 19th, a session she had never planned to skip. An overwhelming sense of dread began to set in. Meanwhile, back at the construction site, police confirmed the mutilated remains belonged to a woman in her early 50s, Huaqing Li herself. She had been battling late-stage cancer, only to end up gruesomely dismembered and stuffed into a suitcase. Authorities expanded their search of the area, but found no trace of the daughter. Continuing the investigation, police headed to the guest house where the mother and daughter had stayed during treatment. The room was locked, so they asked the front desk for help opening it. Inside was a small 172.2 square foot room, unnaturally tidy, with only a single sleeping mat placed neatly on the floor. From the moment they stepped in, something felt off. For a room that had recently been lived in, it was suspiciously clean. All personal belongings, clothes, toiletries were gone, as if someone had deliberately cleaned the space to leave no trace behind. The more closely they inspected, the more strange details they uncovered. Most alarming was a sharp, metallic smell hanging in the air. One experienced officer immediately recognized it as the scent of human blood, a strong indicator that something serious had happened in that very room. Acting on that suspicion, officers searched the room thoroughly and found small traces of blood near the bed and around the sink. Based on the pattern and position of the stains, they theorized that the mother and daughter may have been killed there, around March 19th, matching the timeline when all contact with them was lost. To identify who might have been at the guest house during that time, police interviewed the front desk staff. The receptionist confirmed that no visitors came to see the mother and daughter on the 19th, but added that a guest staying nearby had reported strange noises coming from their room later that night. Police quickly located that guest and asked what he had heard. He described the sounds as bizarre, as if someone were cutting something, mixed with the sound of running water that lasted for hours. Unable to sleep, he knocked on the door and asked them to quiet down. Strangely, all the noise stopped immediately after that. This testimony led investigators to review the building's security footage, and what they found was critical. At approximately 8 p.m. on March 18th, the footage showed the mother and daughter returning to their room as usual, but by 2 a.m., Xiaomin Luo was seen leaving alone, carrying a rag and a large cloth bag, walking quickly and looking unsettled. In the following clips, Xiaomin repeatedly moved back and forth between the room and the shared restroom, appearing to be scrubbing or cleaning something. 1 to 2 hours later, she emerged again, this time with a suitcase and a handbag, and left the room. No one entered or exited the room after that. Given her suspicious behavior and the matching bloodstains in the room, police concluded that Xiaomin Luo was the prime suspect in her mother's murder. They believed she had dismembered the body, packed it into the suitcase, and fled. Authorities immediately notified Xiaoyong Luo, her younger brother, and the person who had filed the missing persons report. But he was in complete disbelief, insisting that none of it could be true. Despite the evidence, Xiaomin Luo remained missing. There were no signs of her using her phone, credit cards, or returning to her hometown. Worried, Xiaoyong pleaded for answers, but police urged him to remain calm, assuring him that as soon as Xiaomin Luo was found, the entire truth would come to light. After being questioned several times by police, Xiaomin Luo's younger brother finally recalled a small rental unit on the outskirts of Chengdu, where she had once lived alone during graduate school. Suspecting she might be hiding there, officers rushed to the location. But upon entering, they were stunned by what they found. The room was a chaotic mess, filled with trash and reeking of a stench so foul that even the most seasoned officers had to step back. Surprisingly, Xiaomin Luo was not there. Refusing to give up, police began canvassing the surrounding area and speaking with nearby residents. Several neighbors remembered seeing a disheveled woman wandering the streets in recent days, her hair matted from not being washed, her clothes unkempt, and her feet bare. The most critical tip came from a local who reported spotting Xiaomin Luo near the rental unit just before dawn on March 21st. Acting on this lead, police set up surveillance and prepared to move in. About 4 hours later, Xiaomin returned to the area and was immediately arrested. Bloodstains were found on her clothes, socks, and undergarments. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to her mother, Huaqing Li. Luo was brought straight to the station and placed in the interrogation room. Instead of confronting her directly with charges, police began with a calm question. Did she know where her mother was? Unexpectedly, Xiaomin laughed and casually responded that her mother had passed away in a hospital a few days earlier. Her odd demeanor prompted investigators to present the evidence. Huaqing Li's dismembered remains had been found at a construction site. They urged her to tell the truth, but Xiaomin's behavior only grew more bizarre. Throughout the interrogation, she showed no signs of remorse or anxiety. Instead, she maintained a half-joking tone, repeatedly denying involvement and claiming she remembered nothing. She laughed, then cried uncontrollably. Her unpredictable mood swings made it nearly impossible to gather a coherent statement. Suspecting she might be faking a breakdown to evade criminal responsibility, police contacted her younger brother for insight. He insisted that Xiaomin had seemed completely normal. He had spoken with her on the phone just a few days prior and noticed nothing unusual. Given her legal background and knowledge of the justice system, police doubted she truly lacked awareness of her actions. With growing concerns, investigators decided to apply psychological pressure. They took Xiaomin to the scene where her mother's remains had been discovered and showed her graphic photos of the dismembered body, hoping to provoke a genuine reaction. But what happened next only deepened their confusion. Rather than showing fear, sorrow, or even discomfort, Xiaomin Luo laughed and made inappropriate jokes about the images in front of her. This disturbing reaction prompted police to call in medical experts for a psychiatric evaluation. However, the results revealed that Xiaomin was mentally sound, with no signs of any psychological disorder. This confirmed their suspicion. Her strange behavior was entirely deliberate, a calculated act to mislead the investigation. Following the psychological evaluation confirming that Xiaomin Luo was mentally competent, police moved quickly to press charges. They already had key pieces of evidence, security footage, neighbor testimonies, and DNA results, all pointing to her as the perpetrator. However, without an eyewitness, gaining a confession became critical. In the end, they turned to the one person closest to her, her maternal uncle. His presence wasn't a random choice, it stemmed from a deeply personal bond. Since high school, Xiaomin had lived with him, supported both academically and financially. To her, he wasn't just an uncle, he had taken on the role of a father figure. So the moment he entered the interrogation room, Xiaomin immediately lowered her head. He gently brought up old memories, walking her to school, the years they lived under the same roof, even a small gift she had once given him for Mother's Day. At that moment, Xiaomin looked up, her eyes blank, and from there, her emotions began to unravel. Through choked sobs, she started to open up about her past, years of quiet suffering and emotional burden. She was born in a small rural village called Suining, into a modest family, her father a factory worker, her mother an elementary school teacher. Her childhood was not luxurious, but it was stable. Her parents were healthy, and they provided a decent life for their children. But everything changed when she turned 14. Her father was diagnosed with cancer, and despite aggressive treatment, the disease spread to his spine, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. He would remain bedridden for the rest of his life. The mounting medical bills and daily expenses plunged the family into crisis. Her mother, Joaquin Lee, was pushed to her limits, working tirelessly while also caring for her immobilized husband and raising 2 children. To ease the burden, Xiaomin, the eldest daughter, was sent to live with her uncle. On the day they parted, her mother had only one plea: study hard, get into a good school, find a respectable job, and someday help our family out of this hardship. That promise became Xiaomin's mission. At her uncle's home, she reportedly slept no more than 3 hours a night, devoting the rest of her time to studying. Her relentless discipline paid off when she was admitted to Xi'an Jiaotong University, one of China's top law schools. She once dreamed of becoming a judge, but her family's financial needs forced her to give up that ambition. Upon graduation, she accepted a position at a reputable firm in Xi'an with an annual salary of $13,900, a figure well above China's average income in 2013. Seeing her daughter succeed, stand on her own, and thrive brought immense pride to Joaquin Lee. She saw it as the reward for all her sacrifices. Carrying that weight of expectation, Xiaomin kept pushing herself. She took on extra work, volunteered for difficult tasks, and chased promotions, hoping to earn more and help lift her family from its troubles. But it was within that very effort that the seeds of tragedy quietly began to take root. Not long after, a business trip was arranged between Xiaomin Luo and her direct supervisor, a man who had long harbored predatory intentions toward her. Taking advantage of the private setting, he attempted to get her drunk during a dinner outing, despite her efforts to stay sober. Back at the hotel, Xiaomin, exhausted and barely conscious, collapsed. While she was in no condition to resist, her boss entered her room and raped her. From that night on, things only got worse. He lured her with promises, promotions, salary raises, even a possible transfer to Chengdu if she kept quiet. But the promises were nothing more than a tactic to maintain control. He continued to call her out under the guise of work and raped her repeatedly. Although she tried to keep everything hidden, rumors began to spread fast. The inappropriate relationship soon became the subject of workplace gossip. Eventually, word reached the supervisor's wife, who stormed into the office one day and, in front of the entire staff, berated Xiaomin as a homewrecker before physically assaulting her in a fit of rage. After the incident, Xiaomin Luo completely fell apart. She couldn't bring herself to tell anyone, not out of shame, but out of fear that her family would blame her. So she chose silence, carrying the weight of everything alone. The emotional toll drove her into a deep depression. Daily functioning became impossible. Eventually, she reached her breaking point and had no choice but to quit her job and return to her hometown, She had hoped that going home might bring some peace, but things were far from simple. Her mother, unaware of what had happened, grew increasingly irritated by her daughter's sudden return. To her, Xiaomin was being irresponsible, quitting a good job, coming back home without a plan, all while still burdened by family debt. Day after day, she scolded Xiaomin for staying inside, for not doing anything useful. The pressure only worsened due to Huaqing Li's overbearing nature. At the elementary school where she worked, colleagues often complained about her authoritarian attitude. Whether at home or at school, Huaqing demanded absolute obedience. She couldn't accept the idea that Xiaomin might push back or express a differing opinion. That emotional pressure only added to the trauma Xiaomin had yet to process. The harsh words, the blame, the disappointment, it all pushed her deeper into despair. Her depression intensified. In her lowest moments, she blamed herself for trusting her boss, for failing to protect herself, and for letting everything spiral to the point where her family, too, suffered as a result. But this time, instead of staying silent, Xiaomin chose to speak. She summoned the courage to have a heart-to-heart with her mother. She admitted she had let her down but pleaded for one more chance. She opened up about her dream of going back to school, earning a master's degree in law and becoming a judge. She believed that pursuing this path could one day bring her a more stable and higher-paying career than the one she had lost. Clinging to a fragile sense of hope after that conversation, Xiaomin Luo moved out and rented a small room, hoping to focus on her studies. But things didn't go as planned. Her untreated depression left her physically and mentally exhausted. She would sleep for long hours or become so drained she couldn't function at all. Unable to take care of herself, her rented room quickly turned into a cluttered mess, filled with an unbearable odor. Just as she was struggling to adjust to this new phase of life, another crisis struck. In December 2012, her mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. Everything became even harder. Her younger brother had to work overtime to make ends meet, while Xiaomin had no choice but to pause her studies and take care of their mother. All of her savings were spent on medical bills. With no other options, the two moved into a cramped room at a guest house for $2.50 per month. The room was so small it could barely fit a single bed. The bathroom was shared with several other tenants. Xiaomin gave the bed to her mother and slept on the floor. During the 3 months they lived there, she was constantly scolded and berated. The mental strain, combined with physical pain, caused Huaqing Li to grow increasingly irritable and emotionally unstable. In her anger, she often blamed Xiaomin for her illness, lashing out with cruel and hurtful words. This relentless tension built up until the night of March 18th. Xiaomin returned to their room around 8 p.m. with less than $4 left in her pocket, not even enough to cover her mother's next hospital visit. After much hesitation, she quietly opened up about their financial struggles and gently suggested that her mother consider borrowing money to get through this rough patch. But instead of empathy, she was met with rage. Her mother blamed her for quitting her job, saying the family wouldn't be in this mess if Xiaomin had just stayed employed. Then, in a moment that broke her completely, her mother proposed that she return to their hometown and marry an older man with money, just for the bride price to support the family. Those words crushed her. All of her efforts and sacrifices suddenly felt meaningless. The very person she had tried so hard to protect was now pushing her past the brink. Overwhelmed with pain and resentment, Xiaomin lost control. In a moment of emotional collapse, she rushed to the corner of the room, grabbed a knife, and stabbed her mother in the neck. Blood spurted from a severed artery. Huaqing Li died quickly from massive blood loss. Only when Xiaomin saw her mother's lifeless body did the full weight of her actions hit her. Panic set in immediately after the initial shock. If the body was discovered, Xiaomin knew her life would be over. Terrified, she shook her head repeatedly, whispering to herself in a desperate attempt to stay calm. As blood spread across the floor, she hurried to clean it up, stuffed rags under the door to block the smell, and then quietly, methodically, began dismembering her mother's body in that tiny rented room. When the act was over, Xiaomin Luo placed her mother's dismembered body parts into a suitcase, then hailed a taxi to an isolated construction site. Believing the area was abandoned and rarely visited, she left the suitcase along with the blood-stained towel and blanket in a shadowed corner. Afterward, she attempted to cover her crime by staging an elaborate escape. Using her legal knowledge, Xiaomin pretended to have lost control of her mental state, behaving erratically to mislead the investigation. At first, the plan seemed to work, until her maternal uncle appeared during an interrogation. At that moment, she could no longer maintain the lie and was forced to confront the truth. From that point on, everything took a dramatic turn. Xiaomin confessed to the entire crime and agreed to stand trial. In December 2013, at the first hearing, the Supreme People's Court sentenced her to death for murdering and dismembering her mother. Her deliberate attempt to fake mental illness and mislead the justice system was considered an aggravating factor in the final judgment. However, during the appeals trial, the case took another unexpected twist when her younger brother, Xiaolong Luo, testified in court. He insisted that his sister had always been selfless, constantly sacrificing her own well-being for the sake of their family. Overcome with emotion, he dropped to his knees and begged for mercy. Moved by his plea and the family's forgiveness, the court agreed to reevaluate her sentence. The revised ruling, announced in 2017, upheld the death sentence, but with a 2-year reprieve. Under Chinese law, if she demonstrated good behavior during those 2 years, her sentence could be commuted to life in prison. By 2025, Xiaomin Luo's sentence was officially reduced, and she is currently serving her time in a correctional facility in China. From Xiaomin Luo's story, many have begun to question society's role in supporting individuals on the edge of collapse. This wasn't just the case of a broken family, it was a warning about the dangers of social neglect. Had someone intervened when she was at her lowest? Had anyone offered support, a solution, or simply reached out at the right time? Perhaps the violence that unfolded that night could have been prevented. In that same climate of silence and hidden suffering, another disappearance shocked the Chinese public. On November 13, 2018, a woman named Ms. Wang, living in Hangzhou, China, was excited to finally reunite with an old friend. Her friend, Xiaomin Tan, had just returned home after completing her studies abroad in the UK. They hadn't seen each other in years, and Ms. Wang couldn't wait to hear stories about life in England. She had arranged to meet her that evening for dinner. But as the minutes turned into hours, concern began to grow. Over an hour had passed, and there was still no sign of Xiaomin. Worried, Ms. Wang texted and called her repeatedly but got no response. Feeling increasingly anxious, she reached out to other friends to ask if anyone had heard from Xiaomin, but they all shook their heads. As the wait dragged on, a deep sense of dread began to take hold. Friends confirmed they hadn't been able to reach Xiaomin Tan since midday on the 13th. Alarmed, Ms. Wang quickly tried contacting Xiaomin's parents. When she finally got through, her father confirmed that their last conversation with their daughter had also taken place around noon that day. Unable to wait any longer, Xiaomin Tan's family filed a missing persons report. In response, hundreds of people, including police, firefighters, and volunteers, were mobilized to search for her. To better understand the young woman the entire city was trying to find, we need to look back at Xiaomin Tan's background. Born in 1995 in Hangzhou, she was the only child in a well-off family. Her father owned a maritime logistics company, and she grew up under attentive and loving care. In 2013, thanks to her exceptional academic performance, she was accepted into Zhejiang University, one of China's most prestigious institutions. Her pursuit of excellence didn't stop there. Xiaomin continued her education in the United Kingdom, completing a study abroad program with success. In the winter of 2018, she returned to Hangzhou full of hope and excitement about starting a new chapter in life. But just a few days after coming home, she vanished without a trace. Based on surveillance footage and witness reports, police determined that she was last seen at Flying Peak, a scenic area near Lingyan Temple, a popular tourist destination in Hangzhou. Footage showed her walking alone, possibly stopping by the area for a moment of calm and reflection before meeting up with friends. But a surprising twist quickly shifted the direction of the investigation. When officers tracked her phone's signal, they found the final location to be in Nantong, Jiangsu Province, a city nearly 2 hours by car from Hangzhou. Xiaomin had no known ties to Nantong, and her sudden appearance there made no sense, especially on the day she was supposed to reunite with friends. Then, just 1 day later, a critical clue emerged. At 1 p.m. on November 14th, Xiaomin's mother received a phone call from her daughter's number. Thinking Xiaomin had finally made contact, she picked up immediately, only to hear a stranger's voice. The caller was a tourist who explained that he had found the phone around 3 p.m. on November 13th near Lotus Peak and had called the most recent contact in an attempt to return it. That seemingly innocent call turned out to be a turning point. After picking up the phone, the tourist had brought it back to his home in Jiangsu Province, causing the GPS system to incorrectly log Xiaomin's last known location in Nantong. This misled the police and cost valuable time. Fortunately, thanks to his testimony, investigators concluded that Xiaomin Tan was most likely last seen near Lotus Peak, part of the Flying Peak Scenic Area. With that, the search zone was narrowed, and the investigation became more focused. According to surveillance footage, at 11:05 a.m. on November 13th, Xiaomin Tan was seen entering the tourist area. While walking around, she frequently used her phone to take photos. At some rest points, she sat alone for a few minutes to relax and enjoy the scenery. What stood out most was how natural Xiaomin Tan's behavior appeared. There were no signs of distress or coercion. Yet, just 20 minutes later, at 11:26 a.m., she abruptly vanished from the surveillance system. From that point on, there were no further images of her captured by any of the park's cameras. While the mountainous terrain made it impossible to cover the entire area with CCTV, the idea that she had simply walked away without leaving a trace was hard to believe. In the meantime, from the moment her disappearance was confirmed, students and faculty at Zhejiang University, where Xiaomin had once studied, joined her family and friends in hoping for her safe return. News of her disappearance spread rapidly across Chinese social media, with heartfelt calls for public assistance in locating her. Then, in the early hours of November 16th, after days of relentless searching, Xiaomin Tan's body was found at the base of a cliff near Lotus Peak. She had fallen from a great height and died in the freezing cold. The suddenness of the discovery left her family, friends, and the public devastated. However, details from the scene quickly shifted the initial assumption that she had simply slipped and fallen. At first glance, many believed it was a tragic hiking accident. But the case was far from simple. Her body showed multiple suspicious injuries, including deep stab wounds to the chest, abdomen, and neck, consistent with a sharp weapon. More crucially, forensic analysis confirmed that the cause of death was acute blood loss from these wounds. Some sources even suggested evidence of sexual assault. These shocking details prompted authorities to immediately classify the case as a homicide investigation. Thanks to that shift in approach, the investigation quickly gained momentum. At the scene, investigators collected DNA evidence believed to belong to the killer, a major breakthrough that dramatically shortened the time needed to identify a suspect. Just 1 day after her body was discovered, on November 17th, police arrested Jicheng Xiong, a 24-year-old man in Guilin, a city located in the Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region of southern China. The legal process moved swiftly. Less than 2 weeks after his arrest on November 28th, Chinese authorities officially charged Jicheng with murder and rape. However, what emerged during the trial shocked the nation. Jicheng Xiong had dropped out of school in middle school, developed a crippling addiction to online gambling, and over the past few years had fallen deeply into debt. Unable to pay back what he owed, he was regularly harassed and threatened by loan sharks, some reportedly going so far as to demand he sell his organs to cover the debt. Living in constant fear, Jicheng became malnourished and emotionally unstable. With no other way out, he decided to flee to Hangzhou in an attempt to escape the loan sharks who were closing in on him. But Jicheng Xiong quickly realized that no matter how far he ran, it was nearly impossible to escape the reach of the people chasing him. In his despair, he began contemplating ending his life, but the thought didn't stop at dying alone. A disturbing idea took hold. If he was going to die, bringing someone with him might make it less lonely. And with that, he began planning something horrifying. According to surveillance footage, after arriving in Hangzhou, Jicheng Xiong spent several days wandering around Lotus Peak and other popular tourist sites. His sole objective, to find a stranger he could die with. Time and again, he returned from the mountain alone, unable to find what he called the right target. Then came November 13th. Xiong returned to Lotus Peak once more. That day he happened to spot Xiaomin Tan, a young woman sightseeing by herself. She matched exactly what he was looking for. At around 12 p.m., under the blazing sun, he made up his mind. Seeing that no one else was nearby, he pulled out a knife he had been carrying and launched his attack. He stabbed Xiaomin Tan repeatedly in the chest and abdomen. As she lay groaning in pain, he shoved her over the edge of a cliff. Miraculously, she survived the fall and remained conscious. Bleeding profusely, Xiaomin tried to cry for help, but in such a remote part of the tourist site, there was no one around. Her voice echoed into the forest and faded into silence. But it didn't end there. Jicheng Xiong slowly climbed down to where Xiaomin lay. As she hovered between life and death, he sexually assaulted her, then resumed stabbing her, this time in the neck. After several more blows, he finally stopped when he could no longer detect any sign of life. Later, Xiong confessed that he had planned to take his own life beside the victim, but ultimately couldn't go through with it. In the end, he gave up and returned home. While fleeing, he even took precautions to hide the murder weapon and his blood-stained clothes at a secret location. On July 26, 2019, the Hangzhou court sentenced Jicheng Xiong to death, citing his cruel motive and brutal method of killing. Xiong, however, filed an appeal, claiming the sentence was too harsh. In the appeal, his defense attorney argued that Xiong's gambling addiction had plunged him into crushing debt, leaving him in a constant state of panic, fearing he would be killed by loan sharks. The lawyer claimed this unstable mental condition had influenced his actions. Additionally, the defense emphasized Xiong's limited education, suggesting he had been manipulated by superstitious beliefs, namely, that someone must accompany him to the afterlife if he were to die. The attorney also noted that the rape occurred only once and asked the court to consider this a mitigating factor. However, those close to Jicheng Xiong rejected the idea that he had any mental illness. After all, his post-crime behavior showed clear intent to conceal the murder, disposing of evidence, covering his tracks, and evading capture. All of these calculated actions proved one thing beyond doubt. Jicheng Xiong was fully aware of what he had done and the consequences it carried. In reality, after being arrested, Jicheng Xiong stubbornly denied all charges, refusing to admit to any wrongdoing. Even during his court trial, he made a shocking claim that all of his previous confessions had been fabricated. Given his lack of cooperation and the especially cruel nature of his actions toward an already severely injured victim, the court upheld the death sentence, stating that such a ruling was necessary to demonstrate the seriousness of the law. Although his right to appeal was exhausted and his execution was carried out in July 2020, the victim's family faced a new legal and emotional battle. The murder had occurred in a well-known tourist destination, a privately operated site that charges an entry fee. Based on that, the family argued that the management should be held at least partially responsible for failing to ensure visitor safety. One critical question they raised was this: if security had been properly enforced, could Jicheng Xiong have smuggled a knife into the area at all? After all, he had spent 3 full days scouting the terrain around Lotus Peak, identifying blind spots and studying tourist patterns. Once he realized the area was poorly monitored and sparsely populated, he saw it as the perfect place to carry out his plan. Even more troubling was the fact that the attack wasn't entirely unwitnessed. Several visitors later recalled hearing faint screams coming from the forested slope near the summit. After descending the mountain, they informed park security that they'd heard cries for help from the cliffside area. But the site's management failed to respond appropriately. No immediate action was taken. No search was organized. The golden window of time to rescue the victim or pursue the suspect was lost. Because of this, Xiaomin Tan's family accused the park of negligence, claiming that poor security indirectly contributed to the tragedy. They demanded a public apology and concrete safety improvements to prevent similar incidents in the future. Many members of the public echoed this sentiment, arguing that if a location charges for entry, its operators bear the responsibility of ensuring the safety of every visitor. The case may be closed, but its emotional weight lingers, a heartbreaking story born out of isolation, desperation, and the systemic failures meant to protect people. Xiaomin Tan, once a promising young woman full of potential, became a victim simply because she happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and crossed paths with a man who wanted to drag someone with him into the abyss. What do you think about this case? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video compelling, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next true crime story.